fragile and resilient business in this time of uncertainty are essential more than ever, and the employee experience it play an essential role in it. How design as a way of thinking can be applied to transform and innovate businesses starting from the employees. Danny Seals made a few business cases about it.
Hello everyone, this is Mirko, host of Alia Stories, and today I want to talk about organization and employee experience. In an anti-fragile and resilient organization, in this time of uncertainty are essential more than ever. And it's not only responding to an unexpected situation like the pandemic we experienced in 2020, but also to react quickly to the market and challenge and grow and innovate. And in this episode, I'm pleased to introduce Danny Seals, Director of Learning, Design and Experience at GP Strategies in the UK. Welcome, Danny.
Hey, Mirko, how are we doing?
Good, thank you. And thank you very much to be our guest.
No, it's my pleasure.
Danny, I would love to talk with you about a lot of things today, but I already know I don't have time enough. But we can start by framing what you do, because your work is definitely, how I can say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a kind of new mix of skills for an emerging type of role, correct?
Yeah, for sure. That's probably the best way to sum it up. So my role is looking at various workforce transformation. So what does that mean? So that means I can be looking at the employee experience on a very macro level, or I can be looking at certain segments of that experience. So that could be employee experience, onboarding, it could be leadership, it could be talent attraction. So there's lots of things what I do there. And some of my stuff is around learning development and learning elimination, which is quite a bizarre topic. But I pull from many different design disciplines to kind of bring together this design approach, I guess. So I work with some big clients to kind of help them on their journey.
I got it. When you're talking about learning, what exactly you mean? You mean helping people to develop new skill, to change? I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So we're learning what we know learning as when we went through school, and what we know learning as now are sometimes deemed the same thing, and often they're not. When we look at say some of the people within an organization, actually we don't need to cram them with knowledge. We don't need to do that. We need to look at how we do learning elimination. How do we help them in their flow of work to be better at their job and actually be at the point of need, so that when they do need a bit of help, a bit of a knowledge or a bit of a resource to do that job, we can be there to do that. So it's more around that learning elimination to be more efficient and more proactive and actually, help the skills and knowledge gap, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, especially, as I said in the beginning, now we are in this kind of fast-paced, constant transformation in the company, where a market change, a new technology come out, new consumer behavior, we need to change how we work. And it's difficult now to see people have the same kind of position, expertise, or skill for like 10 years. They need to change and continue evolving. And I think this is important to make the company competitive as well. So do you see as a kind of connection between this kind of growing learnings in the company and the competitivity of the company itself?
Yeah, for sure. I think I was reading a few weeks back that the people who are in school right now, the jobs what they're going to be doing when they go into working environment don't even exist right now. They don't exist. Exactly. And that's because we're moving in such a fast-paced world. And to some extent, how do we enable them people for jobs what don't exist? Well, we can. But what we can do is we can help them in certain skills which we know are really high. So whether that be a creative thinking, diversity, looking at your kind of that convergent and divergent thinking and critical thinking. So all these skills, while we can't necessarily pinpoint into a role for what might exist in 10 years, we know deep inside that these are the critical skills, the critical capabilities what are going to help our people in 10 years time or in 15 years time for them roles. So it's a challenge, but it's an exciting challenge. And you know, you can hear lots of people driving fear around, you know, AI and how all our jobs are going to disappear. And some jobs will disappear, you know. The jobs what don't need lots of thinking will disappear, the simple jobs. But actually the more complex thinking and the more human touch roles, we're going to need humans to help with that. So, you know, things like rapport and empathy and actually doing real good listening are going to be vital. They're going to be high in demand.
Got it. It sounds like to me is not anymore, not anymore about teaching something new to the people, but it's more like empower people to learn how to change and react.
For sure, for sure. So, you know, when we look at something along the lines of this learn, unlearn approach, like when we strip what that actually means, it's about adaptation. It's about being critical, asking lots of questions around why is it I'm doing this? What I am doing, is that the right way to do it? And is my knowledge right for that? I think it's kind of that constant curiosity. So when I was young, my granddad used to call me the mad scientist. And the reason behind that was I was really inquisitive and always asking why and trying out these ideas and remixing these ideas to see what would happen. And I think what we find sometimes is often we have that as children, but then we lose it as we grow older and we grow into being these adults. And actually, that's the one thing what's going to be so important moving forward. Being able to constantly challenge yourself, ask questions about the knowledge what you already have, and then adapt to that knowledge if it's the right or wrong thing. And it's a skill which I think good people do it automatically. They adapt. You know, you mentioned Nassim Taleb, anti-fragile. That's a great analogy. Moving from this fragile and robust state, and actually, something what shocks a system and grows from it. That's a great example of adaptation. And I think what we're seeing now, given COVID, we're seeing lots of companies who have gone through who've had this digital transformation on a 5-year map. Has happened over 30 days, and that's a great example of that.
And that's shocking because I mean, people sometimes, you know, normally people love to change, but when it's time to change, they are a little bit afraid because they are going in a direction they don't know what can be the result, and it can be very stressful do this kind of change so quickly.
Exactly. I think people love change. I just think they hate transition. It's the transition they hate. They love the change. It's the transition period. It's really murky. Yeah.
That's super cool. And I'm curious because right now, listen to you, I understand the type of the skill you have are very multidisciplinary because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of, as you mentioned before, human understanding, psychology, behavioral science behind. You make a lot of questions. And in fact, your role is about learning, design, and experience. And I think a lot of people now are listening, are asking, okay, what is the connection between these three different things that initially sound very far away as expertise?
Yeah. So this is a juicy question for me. And fundamentally, I try to break it down very, very simple. All we have is experience, right? Like, there's a reason why we can remember our teacher's first name. You know, there's a reason why we can remember our favorite teacher. There's also the reason why we can remember a bully's name. Fundamentally, it's an experience what we've had throughout school, and it's had an emotive and visceral drive on us. Like, I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago, which was saying, you know, the spend on experiences before COVID was going high, and the spend on products was going down. And that's because ultimately, you know, you can speak to people who are on the deathbed, and we ask them, what is it you love about life? Like, what's the things you remember when passing away? And it's always the experiences what they recall. They never ever turn around and say, you know what, Mirko, I loved my iPhone 11. No one ever says that. They say, I love spending time with my family. I loved going through this experience with my family. So once you realize that actually we need to design experiences and moments within an experience, it actually changes your perception of how you look at learning and how you look at problem solving. So, it's the same reason why me and you can go to movies and we can watch the same film, but ultimately we'll take different things away from that film. It's the same reason why we can't promise learning, because we could go to the museum and we can look at a dinosaur and I can go, wow, that dinosaur is X feet high. This was his diet, and I'll take lots and lots of learning from that. But you might look at that same dinosaur and go, it's a dinosaur. And ultimately, it comes back to what matters to me and what matters to the person who's going through that experience. They pull what they want from that experience. So we can't necessarily promise learning. Learning tends to be a byproduct of an experience. So that's why a lot of what I do now is designing experiences and looking at learning elimination to be able to just help them in the flow of work.
Gotcha. Essentially, you are innovate in the space of the, let's say, how we call it traditionally, probably HR on employees learning, by introducing something new like the experience design and the design perspective into this kind of environments. I think it's been difficult because I feel like when you approach maybe the first time your client, you put on the table your expertise learning and developing people, but actually experience and design, some people will be like, oh, what does exactly mean?
Yeah. Oh yes, Miko. I've been there. And the way I try to get around this is I try to, if I'm with a client or I'm in a pitch or a proposal, I try to give the people in that room an experience. So rather than me telling them why the experience is so important, I try to give the people in that experience. So recently we was working on a pitch which was about, it tapped into kind of sports, and it was to do with a big sports client. And instead of pitching, I took in with me some bags, and in these bags was scents, so smells. And I said, before we get involved, before we get started with the pitch, I want you to smell these bags and tell me what comes to mind when you smell it. And in them smells was winter rub, muscle rub. Another one was Play-Doh as a child. Okay. So it's all these smells what triggered emotions and experiences. And all I asked them to do is write down what come to mind. So the trick is to give them an experience rather than trying to talk them through it. So while I can talk to them about, my design background pulls from service design, experience design, speculative design, behavior change design, it can get quite big. So actually, it's about narrowing that down and kind of making it digestible for them to understand. Actually, we're just talking about design as a way of thinking, which I think I've stole that from you, to be honest, Mirko. Okay. That quote. Yeah, I think I've stole that from you, and that's exactly what it is. It's design is a way of thinking.
That's great. And I'm curious about, because sound like when actually you do this kind of consulting work with your client, at a certain point to solve the problem you have on the table, you have to operate in several different areas. As you say, sometimes it's change management, sometimes it's something else. Do you see a connection also between the environment and the employees in terms of how to make it more easy to learn or actually develop a proper employee experience? I'm asking you, sorry, I want to just specify why I'm asking this kind of question. It's about a very cool story now about Steve Jobs in the 98 when he moved back into Apple, and he went to visiting one of the factory in the US. And he was crazy because the factory looks very ugly and dirty. A lot of, you can imagine now, hardware machine producing other hardware, painted in any kind of color, blue, black, red, dust everywhere. And Steve Jobs pretended to clean the entire factory and paint everything on white. And of course, the board of the company was upset because it was like, why we need to spend $1 million to make the factory nobody see all white and fancy, where actually we have some problem to solve more important. And Steve Jobs say it's important because if you are surrounded by a certain kind of environment who lead you to work in a certain way and inspire you in a certain way, you produce much better things and much more faster things.
Mm.
Do you see this kind of connection as well in the work environment and how the people actually perform?
100%, 100%. So it comes back, for me, it comes about environment is a part of design. You know, I guess to give a bit of context, so I've designed my own design flow, how I approach it. So I look at 3 key elements. I look at the problem and what is the challenge. The next stage, I look at the experience. So what is the macro experience? What's the micro and what's the nano experience? And then I look at the tech as the enabler. So the tech is what comes to life, exactly that. So what the tech does. So when we look at the problem, we align that to actually what is the pain points and the frustration, what our people are seeing and what the business is seeing. And we align that problem to a business metric. So we go, right, okay, so is this a case of you need employee experience to decrease? Do you need talent to increase and attraction? Like what is that? What does that look like from a basic performance consulting? And then we do lots and lots of audience insight, quantitative and qualitative feedback, lots of sense making and sense checking of the data, because, you know, we can make data say whatever we want it to say. But the next stage is that experience. And that macro experience takes into place kind of various elements. But once you go around the loop, you'll see in that third loop at the bottom there, the 3 dots, what you can see is space, sense, and story. And that is 3 key points for me. The space in which we operate is vital. It's a reason why we are a collection of our experiences and our moments. And then moments are the environment which we grew up in, the environment in school, and the environment which we work in. And I think fundamentally, we need a creative space. We need a collaborative space. Some of our biggest learnings and our biggest sharings happen when you walk into an elevator and you're walking with a work friend. And to some extent, that's what we're noticing missing very much in this COVID world. The micro interactions are missing now. And we have to drive more than ever to try and create them and allow them to happen in a digital sense. So that connection of space and physical space, one of the things we're looking at right now is connected space. So when we return to work, how can we make this connected space tap into a more holistic approach, well-being and wellness? You know, one of the things which I think Microsoft are doing really, really well now is they know, and I use this analogy, fish where the fish live. Okay. They know all the fish are using Teams right now. So what that means is all the data, what they're pulling is how much people are online, how much they're collaborating, and how much space they've got to think and just breathe. So their analytics on wellness is so cool, and I recommend people check that out, because for me that's taking something what is really hard to put together, and Microsoft have figured it out very quickly. You know, you can start looking at burnout and when that happens and why people are at the laptop for 8 hours a day and not taking breaks. So it's a really important point, that space. And there's lots we can do with that, and there's lots of learning moments, what can happen in your transition and your touch points within a physical space. But I think given COVID, that's also one of the things we're missing. So that's why we look at the tech, what's in place now. And that's the consumer grade tech, the enabler, right? Like we have this great experience of using apps in our consumer life. So Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp, all these apps are really consumer grade. No one needs to tell you how to use them. But actually what happens is we come into a corporate world and the technology doesn't match our expectations. So then it jars straight away. So we have to look at the tech selection and then go, right, what tech will work with our people? And actually what tech will remove friction in order for our people to have collaborative conversations, get to the information they want, and try and pull in as much of that elements missing from the physical face-to-face.
Yeah, that actually, you just remind me, is very a lot right now. There is actually a lot of movement in the startup space for employee experience, as you say, to develop this kind of technological environment to enable all this kind of interaction. And I'm curious, as you say, also, what is going to happen the next 12, 18 months in the workplace and the employee experience, because at least here in the US, we're expecting to see a very hybrid model for the future. Like people going back in the office for sure, but at the same time spending a lot of time at home working from home. And office are going for sure change the configuration. We are going to expecting have less and less, I can say, line of desk, and have a much more flexible space where people can decide how to work, if you want to work in group or you want to work alone because of active thinking. And as you, to your point, the micro interaction would be the most important aspect, and it would be very interesting to see how the things are going to change.
For sure, for sure.
Also, you just remind me, Microsoft, yes, we are doing a lot of great things. I know also there are rumors Microsoft is looking for buy Slack, because finally it will be provide much more data. And just for talking and joke about the employee experience, you know, Slack is one of the most hated tool from a lot of people.
Yeah.
Produce a lot of stress. Actually, it doesn't help the employee experience. However, it's a learning process, right?
Yeah, I mean, we see it, right? Like, no matter what tech we put in place,
yeah,
there needs to be bigger thinking on the usage of that tech. Because all what happens is we remove emails and then we replace it with 20,000 Slack channels. So actually the noise becomes louder. So, you know, as much as we change the technology, we also have to change that ways of working and usage of that technology. Yeah. And that becomes more a behavior piece and looking at how, as an org, we use certain technology and change that behavior, you know, iteratively.
Great. Danny, I have a last question for you.
Sure.
For who's start a new business today with maybe few collaboration, when we don't talking about large organization, more like a small startup with a few people, maybe 10 people, what do you recommend in terms of how to start thinking about the employee experience?
So this is a question what's near and dear to me. So, you know, I'm in the process of starting my own startup, Vendor, and the way I'm looking at this right now is we will work ultimately in a service space, and then naturally we'll create a better experience which will transform the industry of which it needs to be. But underpinning behind that service needs to be good people, right? A good service needs good people. So I think, you know, the one thing we have to be mindful of, and I've worked with a startup before, and I really enjoyed the experience. I helped shape their digital product, the front end and back end. But one of the things which I've seen happen in other startups is we employ these great people and these really creative minds, and we say, yes, you're exactly what we want. And then we bring them in, and then we time box them, we put them in this restraint, and everything what we've brought them in for, we stop them from doing. So when we look at what we want, we have to be mindful that we bring in the right people, but actually we allow them to be what they need to be and what we got them in for in the first place. And that ultimately comes down to leadership and understanding how we can not manage this person, but lead them and lead with them side by side on that journey within a business and within a startup. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think that's massively important. I think that's super important. And one of the things which we see a lot with startups is the scalability of employee experience. What tends to happen is you have a small startup which has a great vibe, a great culture, and it actually also understands that a culture consists of mini cultures within there, and many things what are being shared. That's ultimately what a culture is. It's patterns and it's sharing of things. But then what happens is it starts getting bigger, and then scaling that becomes hard. So it isn't about having behaviors and values in place as such, but it's about understanding what we want them to be and actually what they already are. Like, what we don't want to do is get people in and say, stop what we got you in for and be this. So it's about kind of, the best way I can describe this, it's about allowing them to be them and bringing themselves to work, and not being the blocker ultimately for what we've got them in for. That's in a startup phase for sure. That's vital.
That's super cool and useful. Thank you. Well, okay, now we are on the end. But before close of this episode, I want to remind everyone who's watching or listening this here, you can find all the links and information about Danny in the description here below. Danny, thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Mirko, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.